This is Uncommonly Remarkable, where we discuss the surprising everyday lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. My name is Artis Beatty. I am a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and the conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. So this is a special moment for me. We're getting to the very end of 2024, and I've had an opportunity to talk to some very interesting and intriguing people over the course of the year. As I've gotten better at doing the podcast and kind of thinking more about the questions I want to ask and getting the answers that I think are appealing to not just me, but to you guys, you've given me feedback and really showed which episodes rung most true to you. So as part of continuing my growth and the growth of the podcast, kind of closing out 2024, I wanted to bring some of those episodes back and to discuss them with some of the points that you've made in either comments or in phone calls, emails, text messages about what you thought was important, and hopefully give people kind of a preview of the evolution of the podcast. You know, when we started this a little more than a year ago, the intent was to talk a lot to people who've done some amazing things throughout their life and kind of combine that with their personal lives and their personal life stories. What has really happened for me is that not only have we learned a lot about the individual as an individual, and then a lot about what they've done, but it's become evident that we're surrounded by entrepreneurial spirit. And a lot of the podcasts have really been about the things that an individual might do in order to either grow a business, to start a business, to develop a business, and how they do that while maintaining the balance of what's important to them from a life perspective and what that means to others. And so back several years ago, maybe, oh my gosh, I'm dating myself, decades ago now, Mariah Carey released the Number Ones album. And in the interviews and the media clips leading up to the release of that album, she said that this was a collection of the songs that she had performed that went to number one, but they were not necessarily a collection of what she thought were her greatest hits. And it was interesting because you would almost think that those two things were the same. And now I understand that a little bit differently. I've enjoyed all of the shows that I've been able to put together, and I've learned so much. But the ones that have resonated with you, the audience, the listener, and the ones that I took some of the biggest points from are not always the same. And so for this purpose, we're going to look at the ones that resonated the most with you guys, the ones that had the most listens, had the most comments. And at some point, maybe we'll do what I consider to be my top shows, which may be a little different than the ones on this list. But again, thank you for the great year of 2024. And let's talk about some of these episodes. So one of the ones that had some of the biggest listenings and the largest listenership was episode 7.1, which is Tony Frazier, Homes Designed for Life. And in this episode, we talked to Tony Frazier, who is the owner and founder of Frazier Home Design. And Frazier Home Design is a company that specializes in high-end residential design and is dedicated to creating unique homes that are tailored to fit the client's lifestyle. And Tony has a really unique approach to home design, and he talks about that in the episode. And he also let us have a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. So we started to understand a little bit more about how the designs came together, what he does for clients, how Frazier Home Design is different. And we learned about sketching and architecture and some of the other things that have influenced Tony over time, including some music. And so one of the questions I asked him in the very beginning was really how he started to know that he was going to head down this path of being able to design and draw homes. And it was really interesting because it turns out that this is somewhat of a family affair for Tony, in that his grandfather was a civil engineer and other members of his family were involved in creative processes or the physical building process. So take a listen.
So it was a big thing for me, and that's how it kind of started. And my grandfather was a civil engineer, and he taught at Wake Tech, and he was retired. And so when he retired, he taught at Wake Tech and taught architectural history and statics and strengths of material. And my dad was a tile guy, and my brother, 7 years older, was in construction. So it just kind of like started to form, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I don't know what else I'm gonna do. So I guess I'll go to Wake Tech and go into architecture. And the idea at the time was to transfer to the School of Design, and I started going to Wake Tech and loved it. Like I ate it up, man. I got in there, was like, dude, this is awesome.
And interestingly, this process for him designing homes really encompasses quite a few things from the technology side that maybe I wasn't aware of, and maybe you guys weren't either, some of what's now available for clients who are in the building process. And so typically speaking, when you're thinking about homes and building, you're thinking about the two-dimensional floor plan. But Tony started to talk about some of the technology involved that allowed people to walk through spaces. And I just found it completely fascinating. So take a listen to this piece.
So day one of that we walk them through the house in 3D. It's super rough.
That's amazing.
And it's awesome. It's come a long way.
Yeah.
It's really cool. But it's rough. Like, it's not their exact finishes. There's not like crown molding or baseboard or anything. It's just like, here's the spatial recognition of this room so that you kind of know where you are. Because not everybody looks at 2D plans all day and understands what that feels like, right?
Yeah.
So we walk them through those spaces. And so I'll kind of like toggle between 2D and 3D the entire time. I'll make markups with a red pen. And much like the first meeting, we might shift some rooms around and pivot on some things and ultimately come up with a set of red lines. And then we do it all over again. They disappear for a few weeks. We present them with another drawing. We meet, we sit down, we mark it up again. And then we just keep doing that back and forth throughout the entire process.
When we talk about designing homes, there is an element of designing a home for designing a home's sake, where you might think about true architecture, where you might think about physical design, the things that would be signature, things that you're thinking about that are going to be able to be designated as your design cues. But Tony thinks about those things in terms of how does it really affect homeowners. And so he talks a little bit about that. And I thought it was really, really interesting.
Certainly early on, right? Like, again, I told you I kind of went down the rabbit hole of English arts and crafts architecture, which has a lot of peaks, a lot of swoops, a lot of window towers. And that's just what I was like, man, this is really cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to work in a window tower, even in a French style house, right? Like, how can I pull all these elements together? And you know, I struggle with it because, like, you know, you think of like Picasso or something, you can see one of his designs from a mile away, right?
Right.
But I'm designing for homeowners.
Often, though, what I've learned as I've talked to individuals during the show is that what they do from an entrepreneurial standpoint is often an outpocket of some other thing that they do in their daily lives that was very interesting to them, or they've managed to somehow put those things together and create something larger. And for Tony, it's the artistic piece that I think is most impressive. And like a lot of artists, he has multiple genres or multiple mediums that he uses in order to express himself, music being one of them. And going into the conversation, I knew that he was a big music fan. I didn't realize that he played the guitar, that he had a band. And it was during the conversation that I started to pull those threads together. But it was neat to hear him talk about being younger and putting together a band. Listen to him describe the early days in his music.
I got a guitar for Christmas in 1991.
Okay.
And, it was the era of grunge at the time, so like grunge is really big. So I got really, really into Nirvana and Soundgarden. And really it came about because there's a group of kids. I lived in this neighborhood. We had all these kids. We grew up there our entire lives together. Mm-hmm. And there was a group of 4 boys that I hung out with most of the time. And we decided we wanted to start a band, but we didn't know how to play instruments. And so we all kind of, I don't know that we drew straws, but we kind of like went around and like, what do you want to play? What do you want to play?
And finally, I asked Tony to talk to us a little bit about starting a business. Like, what advice would you give if someone was thinking about starting a business, not necessarily in home design, maybe, but just in general? What things did you need to think about? And he brought to the forefront things about work ethic and being able to continually evolve, but he says it a lot better. So listen to this.
I'll zoom out a little bit and think about just business in general. One, you have to really, really love what you do. And you have to be, especially if you're starting a bit like on your own, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have to love what you do. You are not going to work less when you start your business than you did when you were working for somebody. It is going to be painful and you're going to grind and you have to be willing to work through all of that pain. And in the end, you have to love it. Otherwise you'd be crazy, right? So You have to love what you do and push and always continuously evolve.
I really, really enjoyed my time with Tony. And like a lot of my guests, as I've continued to grow, I want to be able to actually revisit some of that conversation with him and to pick up on some of the things that he's done since our interview. So as we move into 2025, if there are people that you want me to bring back to the show, let me know. So we'll get them back and we'll have more conversation about some of the things that they did. Really thinking about big conversations, I think one of the biggest conversations I had in 2024 was episode 23.2, Jay Woody. Title of the show is Have I Lost My Religion? And this was a big, big episode, not only because Woody has a huge personality and he's done a lot of things, but he was very open to talking about any number of subjects during the show. And so if you remember, Woody describes himself as an outdoor enthusiast. He's a big sports nut, but he's also a bibliophile. And he currently works with UNC Chapel Hill, and he manages the budget for the history department for staffing and other things. But he's done so many other things along the way. He's been a bull rider in the rodeo. He started a nonprofit in East Africa. He's spent a lifetime just kind of thinking about where he fits in the bigger scheme of things. He's earned a bachelor's in economics. He's earned a master's in theology, humanities, and public school administration. And then he's gone from being an educator to a pastor and then back again as a principal. And so there was just so much to talk about. The first thing we really discussed, though, in laying out the story around Woody was his work in East Africa when he was helping to develop this ministry. And he talked about being in East Africa, meeting and working with the children, and how big and important this work was, not because of him, but the global, or I should say, the more universal theme of being able to give something to children. But he found that the children were giving something to him. So take a listen.
I went there thinking, what can I do and what can I give to these poor people? And lo and behold, they're the ones who kind of changed my life. They made my world much bigger, and all of the stereotypes, the perspectives that I had of what I would experience in a place like that were really just kind of thrown out the window pretty quickly.
So you're there and you're absorbing, you're learning more than you're teaching.
For sure.
But that somehow sparked I want to do more work with children?
Absolutely.
And as we continued to talk about that mission, we ended up starting to have conversation around his path to become a pastor and why he felt that that was his new mission and what he should be doing. Take a listen to this.
Growing up in small town, North Carolina, Southern Baptist Church, it was bestowed upon me and ascribed to me to become this pastor. And it's the path I started walking down. And I genuinely wanted it at the time, for sure. Life turned out differently, and that's okay. I'm happier.
How long were you a minister or pastor?
So I was in seminary, I'd probably say from 24 years old, 25, up until about 30.
Okay.
Not long.
Mm-hmm.
Not long.
And although he was clearly devoted to that part of his life as a pastor, he never felt really comfortable and not the type of discomfort in maybe I'm not doing as well as I should be doing, but more in the am I doing what I should be doing? And that led him to this period of time where he was doing something different, the divergence that he must have felt. And he started to think about and participate in the rodeo of all things.
I deeply wanted to be this super masculine, godly man. And naively, I thought that's how I would achieve that.
So how long were you in the
rodeo?
Yeah.
I definitely stopped riding in around 28, 29.
That's a long time.
It's too old. Yeah, it's too old.
That's a long time.
I only got injured really one time. I broke a bunch of fingers at one time. And I never did. I rode in several places in the country, but it was not an earn a living type of thing. I mean, it was just small town rodeos. And I did ride in Houston one time and never won any money. Always got beat by 14-year-olds, but I did get a couple cool belt buckles and I did have a couple 8-second rides, but it wasn't about that for me.
But in the end, he really went back to his roots. And in the conversation, we talked a lot about the fact that he was really searching for internal answers, and the rodeo allowed him to explore parts of him that he was not sure he would be able to otherwise. But ultimately, he ended up back in education. And this time around, however, he was involved as a principal, and it was away from the religious background that had really foreshadowed everything that he had done previously and predicted his future. He kind of broke that. And one of the things that I took away from the conversation was that he still felt that there was much more that could be done through the education of children, and being able to think about the education of children without the religious component really opened his eyes to what was lacking. Take a listen to this.
I used to think, they weren't shackled by the comforts of their couch. They weren't thinking about their next video game. They were just living. Not that I don't want them to have more than that. That's not what I'm saying. But I think what I left being a principal, what has stuck with me is that we need a society that finds ways to take care of those who don't have. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it would be great if the church stepped up and did that, but it's not happening.
Ultimately, though, the conversation with Woody ended with us thinking about where he is today and how he looks at his overall life. And he is very grateful, and he really points to all of the different pieces that built the Woody that we know today. But one of those pieces I found extremely interesting, and that was the moment he talked about defining God and how that makes him feel now. Listen to this.
Well, for so long, either through my seminary training or what I was taught in church growing up, I've been told to define God, define Scripture, define your theological beliefs. I no longer feel like defining it, and I haven't felt like defining any of that for years now, 12, 13, 14 years, because for me, giving up having to have a definition for God helps me feel free. There's a liberation with that.
I really enjoyed my conversation with Woody, and I've known him for a very long time, and seeing him grow and change over time has been phenomenal. If you remember from the full episode, he has an Instagram account that's really dedicated to books and book reading. And his goal for that account was to get enough followers that he would have enough influence that he could get free books. And my understanding is that since the recording of that episode, he's continued to grow that account. He's getting his free books, but he's also being able to give people reviews and talk about the books that he's read, help to influence a whole new generation of people who may not be going to physical bookstores and buying physical books. Although I do understand that they're starting to make a comeback, because there's something to be said about the feel of touching a real actual book. So congratulations, Woody, on all of the growth that you've had. And I look forward to catching up with him soon. And again, if he's one of those that you want to know more about or would like to have back onto the show, let me know in the comments, and we'll see if we can't get Woody to come back and talk with us. One of the breakout shows for 2024 was the show 18.2, Dr. Joe Hummel, Functioning at Peak Performance. So Dr. Joe came on the show, to my surprise, reluctantly. He had sworn that he was not going to do any podcast, and I asked him, and he actually said yes, he would come and he would do this. And I didn't know it at the time that he was making an exception to his rule, but I'm very, very grateful that he took the time to come and sit down with us. And of the shows of 2024, his had the highest number of initial listens. And part of that, I think, is because he has a huge patient base that really loves him, but his staff at his office really, really, really think a lot of him. And so they spend a lot of time marketing his episode on my behalf, which I tell them thank you every time I get to stop by and see them for helping us get this episode out, because I thought there was some amazing information. So Dr. Hummel is the owner and the chief medical officer of Prime MD Aesthetics and Wellness. And if you remember, he describes himself as purposeful and hardworking, but he really is a gracious and kind and wonderful person who's really dedicated to helping others achieve their potential. He was a collegiate athlete, was a wrestler, and he just recognizes in general the importance of functioning at peak performance and really helping to achieve one's highest level of vitality. He had a residency at the Mayo Clinic. He's been board certified with a clinical focus on anti-aging medicine and medical informatics. And if you remember, he spent a long time working in the emergency department, where he learned all types of things and was thrown into the deep end, so to speak, in some of those days. And we really talked about elements in his childhood that kind of made him think differently. Several moments when he was not only metaphorically hit in the head, but physically hit in the head, that helped change directions about the way he thought about things, and how he practices medicine versus how others practice, and why servant leadership is so important to him. And so when we really started to sit down and talk about what led him to where he is today, one of the biggest things that he brought out was looking at bridging the gap between determining where you are and where you want to go, and how that's related to fulfillment and that versus reality. So take a listen to him explain it.
If I end up being like this gentleman, I don't think my life's going to be what I want it to be from a happiness standpoint. The fulfillment just wasn't there watching this live. And it's one of those moments I think we all had where it's like, oh, if this is my reality, that's reality I don't want. But if I put all this time and effort, so it's like, what do we do now? Yeah. Right? How do we bridge the gap? So I'm deciding this. I'm hearing my wife and, this relational aspect of things and how she's approaching her clients. And I'm really kind of digging that. And then I literally, had this moment where I was smashed on the head with a weight bar at the gym.
And then there was this moment where he started to recall the educational experience he got at Mayo Clinic and how those experiences started to help him develop his way of thinking about patient care. Take a listen to this.
Through the whole education process of college and then, graduate school, going for your doctorate, right? It's just, bang, bang, again, just breaking rocks, just learn. And not a lot of time sometimes to think, as silly as that sounds, but it's like, I have to ingest, absorb all the time, right? This drinking from a fire hose analogy, but never having the time to kind of sit back and think. I chose to go to a residency at the Mayo Clinic, based out of Rochester, Minnesota, and spent some time during there in Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic itself, and actually some time at this hospital in Des Moines, Iowa. So kind of interesting. When we were up at Mayo Clinic, it was the full Mayo Clinic experience, right? Like Saudi princes flying in, and we would literally greet them at the private airport with our Mayo Clinic jackets with lapel monikers and placards.
And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was that so often in the educational arena, when you're seeing patients, you lose track of those patients. And so you are learning, and for that moment in time, you are that patient's doctor. And then you move on to your next rotation, and you don't necessarily know what happens with that patient. And so you don't know if your plan of action was a great plan, a terrible plan, or what you should do next. But he had the opportunity to actually follow a patient that started in one rotation and moved to another. And what we learned is that really helped shape some of the thoughts that he had around taking care of people. Listen to him talk about that.
I'm the first person to see him, right, as this intern/resident. And we triage him very quickly. We get him to the cath lab. His heart is blocked. They put a stent in, saved his life, right? Spends, I guess, Friday night, Saturday night in the hospital, goes home Sunday, something like that. I'm off service. I had Sunday off. Monday, I shift to the cardiology practice, right? So I was shadowing as a family doctor the preceding week.
Okay.
This next week, I switched to be a month as a cardiologist intern. And sure enough, Monday morning, in walks Steve-O, this guy that I saw Thursday, healthy, with an LDL of 126, who then Friday night had a heart attack. And now he's having his cardiology follow-up again. Wonderful turnaround, Mayo Clinic turnaround. Like, this guy is in the office Monday morning for his cardiology follow-up. And the cardiologist opens up the chart and says, "You had a heart attack."
The ER really shaped a lot of his thoughts about taking care of people. It's not necessarily the emergency medicine, but more so, how do these things happen? And are there any things that could be prevented to reduce the chances that you would be in emergency medicine? And how can you create a fulfilling career around something that is not necessarily these emergencies? And so, but he learned a lot from the ER, and he talked about it several times, but this is my favorite thought on that.
And so I spent a 15-year career in the ER seeing amazing, wonderful, crazy, wild things. I loved every minute of it, but I don't miss it for a second. Sort of idea of just crazy stories, amazing things, and just getting tons and tons of experience at like having wonderful, amazing, crazy things thrown at you right in the ER experience, gunshots and gang violence. And I had a woman literally shoot a baby at me. She shot a baby out at me and like hit me with the baby. Like, just amazing stories of what you could, every great medical show over the 15 years, you get to see those things work in these like rural ER hospitals.
One of the things that I also took away from that conversation is that Dr. Joe really wanted to help normalize some of the conversation about good days and bad days, and the work that he really does to help people have more good days. I thought that was really important in the conversation because quite often we talk about the good things and we really look at the upbeat part of the day-to-day. And Dr. Joe talked about, well, even the most upbeat and people who are doing their best can have those days where things are not quite perfect. And his goal was to really have those people have more of those good days. So listen to this.
At the end, like most of us, I don't say we're hanging there by a thread, but sometimes a couple threads, but right, we're all just trying to make it through the day, right? I have good days and bad days, just like everybody else. And, where I was like a little more energy or a little better mood or some better sleep some nights, of course. But I think supporting folks through, and I think normalizing that is a big deal, because everybody thinks, oh, here comes artist, right? And he's got this huge car, he's flying around doing these amazing things. He has this podcast and, just kicking butt. But, artist got some tough days, right? And some days just like, man, if I could just make it through today, that would be good.
That's
and so
exactly it.
If I can help artists have a 10% better day, right? Or make that day that was just going to be okay, like, oh, you know what? Like, that was a good day, or a good day to a great day, right? Sometimes just turn that dial up.
Ultimately, though, I wanted to know from Dr. Joe, how do you decide if you're doing what it is that is the right work for you? And how do you continue to grow and move forward doing that work? And Dr. Joe gave some great advice around identifying purpose. Listen to this.
I believe trying to identify your purpose and what makes your heart open or sing or whatever word you want to choose there. I think anything we do that gets us to that purpose is the best thing that we can do for ourselves. And how do we get there? That's the rough spot, right? We have to have enough energy, enough focus, enough mood, enough financial resources, right, along the way to get there. But again, I look at myself of my purpose is to help other people find or help them get to that purpose a little better.
All in all, it was a great conversation with Dr. Joe, and we did not get into a lot of detail around his practice and some of the things that they are doing in his practice that are innovative, that are different, that may be things that that could help a lot of individuals with specific types of questions or concerns. And that may be something that we should explore on a future podcast if I can convince him to do a second episode. If you'd like to hear more from Dr. Joe and learn more about his practice, then leave me a comment and we'll see if we can't get Dr. Joe back onto the show. Now, as we talk about episode 15.2, Lisa Sun, Building Gravitas, I do think this is one of the places where your picks and my picks certainly coincide, maybe even closer than anywhere else. Lisa Sun is the founder and CEO of Gravitas, a revolutionary company on a mission to make over women from the inside out. She's the author of the national bestseller Gravitas, The 8 Strengths That Redefine Confidence. And she's been a speaker all over the country, all over the world. In this particular episode, we learned about superpowers and how to harness, nurture, and grow them. And then we explored differences in extroverts and introverts and how we complement each other. And we learned a lot about Lisa's personal story, and I just found it absolutely fascinating. Now, Lisa and I had the opportunity to have dinner together randomly after an event several years ago, and we talked about the dinner conversation that we had between us. And I did not know at the time, but she was actually helping me understand how to have a better and more fulfilling conversation with an absolute stranger. And those types of insights are where I think Lisa shines. She started Gravitas with fashion, and the mission was to catalyze confidence. But let her tell you.
Well, many of my friends who are entrepreneurs will not say that they had that moment in the shower. Like, I just don't have those like lightning bolts. But I started with this idea of our mission is we catalyze confidence.
Okay.
I literally wrote down, we catalyze confidence. That was kind of the core thought. It expresses itself through fashion and clothes we make, but also now through content, experiences, right? It's actually expanded beyond that. Because I think fashion fundamentally is becoming commoditized. I think you can buy anything, anywhere on sale. And so fashion was an entree to pull out all of our ideas and create a vehicle through which we could reach people. I think now we sell a book for $26.99. I think that is not as good as a dress, but you still get that feeling of what we do in clothing.
She goes on to talk about the tools for confidence, like that we're not going to change personality types. In fact, it's okay to have extroverts and introverts and the blending between the two. And the complement between an extrovert and an introvert can actually be very powerful. Part of that, though, is understanding how to have conversations. And there are things that we do automatically that may, in fact, be hindering our ability to communicate with each other. And so she talks about different ways to start and have conversations, particularly when you're meeting someone for the very first time. Take a listen to this.
You're seated next to someone you don't know at a dinner. And do you feel comfortable and confident in those situations? And I find it's not about, I want you to be an extrovert. I don't want anyone to change who they are. But I want you to have a couple of tools to say, how did you end up at this party? Tell me how you know everyone. Actually, I hate the question, what do you do for a living? Because what if you're seated next to a full-time parent who actually feels insecurity about they used to work and they don't anymore? You know, I always find that question a trap because it means I'm trying to size you up. I'm trying to decide if you're worthy of my attention. So what I always like to say instead is like, how do you make a difference in the world? Like, what are you excited about? What are you into right now?
Then we began to talk a little bit about her family life and her mother and her father as immigrants in the U.S. and her growing up. And there were several formative moments that she brought to our attention, and I think they were incredibly powerful. One of the themes that she wove through these stories, though, was thinking about creating something from nothing, developing a sense of possibility. Listen to this.
When you can create something from nothing and you see people who have vision before reality and then they will it into existence, it gives you a sense of possibility. But like in terms of formative moments, I remember, you know, if you're an immigrant kid, you don't really understand birthday parties. And when I was 12 years old, my mom said, you can have a birthday party. We'll have it at the restaurant. It'll be on a Saturday. And she was like, kids eat for free, but adult must pay. And I actually think she picked like a slow Saturday so she could drive lunchtime volume, right? So she's like, I invite everyone in class, but adult must be there. I don't want to babysit kid. Your birthday, kid eat free, but parent must pay.
And then we learned from Lisa that your life story is your leadership story. And there is a lot involved in how you could get to where you are today. And there's a bunch of that thematically through all the episodes in the podcast. What's interesting is that I never really thought about those until actually having this conversation with Lisa. Take a listen to her talk about that.
I always say your life story is your leadership story. So all of us need to pick a couple moments in our life story to talk about. I always say the formation of where I am today really came in two places. The first being my parents are immigrants from Kaohsiung, Taiwan, college educated, came to the US with nothing. Mom worked on a hamburger truck. Dad worked on a loading dock. Owned an all-you-can-eat Mongolian barbecue in the 80s and 90s, $4.95 at lunch, $12.95 at dinner. And at 8 years old, I don't think my mother understood child labor laws, so I was the first cashier at the restaurant.
And as part of our developmental path, there are times that you think about shedding, and it's a conversation internally about conformity and what your truths are and what's important to you and what you should be holding on to. And Lisa talks about this in the episode. Take a listen to this.
I think there's also this thinking around shedding, right? Which is shedding the stories we tell ourselves. And what I mean by that is I never wanted to be known as an Asian female entrepreneur. I just want to be an entrepreneur, right? And then over time, and I think that's just because I grew up in a place where we didn't belong to anything. We weren't part of anything. And so my parents were like, let's assimilate, like just achieve and like forget your heritage, right? Thank goodness I speak Mandarin Chinese. I feel like that's the one part they enforced. But my little brother is a millennial and he's an activist. And he's like, you've got to own your truth. You have to own who you are, right? And I call myself a reluctant activist.
There was a lot of conversation about superpowers. And the thought around having these pieces of yourself, part of your personality, part of your ability that you do and do better than anyone else is amazing. It gives you a real sense of pride to think, wow, I am really good at this, or wow, these are the things that I do very well. It also gives you awareness of things that you could develop where, oh, wow, I'm not great at being able to do this particular thing, and I would like to get better at doing those. The conversation around superpowers is actually very, very gratifying because it answers a lot of questions about the why around some of the things that you do or that you don't do. One of the superpowers that I personally do not have at the level that I'd wish to have is the self-sustaining superpower. That's the superpower that allows you to internally compete with yourself, to have internal drive and build your own internal self-value. And you do that regardless of what's happening externally. And so while having competition with others and wanting to have feedback from others and understanding what others think about some of the things that you say, do, or perform is really important, being able to look at that yourself and be able to be satisfied with that piece of yourself is also important. And Lisa talks about that, and I found it absolutely fascinating. Take a listen.
I'm like, do you like them? Do you like my bangs? He goes, does it matter if I like them? You're the one that has to look at yourself every day. Why'd you get them if you don't like them? I'm not going to tell you if I like them. You're the one that has to like them. Do you like them? And I was like, I don't know. I think so. He's like, well, I'm not going to tell you. You have to decide if you like them. And I was like, you're right. I love them. And I was like, why was I seeking your approval? Like, I paid for this overpriced haircut.
Why did I ask you? Yeah.
So like every day I have a daily reminder, be self-sustaining today. You're the one that chose the bangs.
I really can't wait to see where Lisa goes next. She's been such a good friend and so influential across multiple platforms. And I just see her continuing to skyrocket. And so those are some of the shows that you guys selected as the best of 2024. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to these episodes, for giving me feedback and going on this journey with me. I continue to grow and change. And although these episodes were not in the order that they were released, if you're like me, you can hear some of the subtle differences in the way the conversations went as I've gotten more familiar with the platform and understanding how it works. And after having heard from you, the listener, on what works well for you and what you want more of. And so as we look at 2025, I'm extremely excited because I've already got a fantastic list of guests lined up, and we're going to be exploring a whole bunch of different subject matters that I personally am excited to explore, but had no idea that we'd be talking about or touching on as we move into 2025. I'm also excited because in 2025, we're going to be making the transition from audio-only podcasts to adding video. This is a very big step for me because I want to learn the platforms and understand how things work, put the technology together, and provide this audio show. But a lot of you want to see the guests that we're talking to, and video is really exciting. And so I've started putting together a different type of studio, and I am getting all of the technology ready. And as we move into the end of first quarter, early second quarter, these shows will convert. And not only will you be able to listen to them on your favorite platform, but you'll also be able to watch them on video platforms. I hope to have snippets and shorts. We'll do more reels, but we also will have formal YouTube videos as well. So again, a very exciting 2025 coming up. Thank you for listening through today's episodes. And again, if you liked what you heard, go back and check out not only those episodes, but some of the rest in the catalog. Tell me what you think. And if we get new votes or we get listenings to change, we'll go back and talk about some of those episodes in more details. Maybe we'll give you some behind the scenes as well. Until then, I really, really thank you for all that you've done for me in 2024. I'm sure you've done a lot for others. And until next time, stay remarkable. And so we end another episode. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. I certainly appreciate all your support. So if you enjoyed the content, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends. The more you share, the more opportunities we will have to bring you great guests and their remarkable stories. And if you want to know more about the guests, get background information on previous episodes, or just learn a bit more about me and the show, visit us at uncommonlyremarkable.com. Feel free to leave me a comment or a suggestion, and if you want to be featured on the show, click the Contact Us button. Until next time, stay remarkable.